Welcome back to Derry Public Radio. Reporting from the basement of the Derry Civic Center, this is CM Alexander with the news. A geological study has confirmed that at one time, long before the town was settled, Derry was struck by a massive object from the stars. While those performing the study were eager to continue their investigation, the Derry City Council unanimously denied the request. After all, what effect could it have on us now? You are listening to Derry Public Radio. This is Derry Public Radio.
Welcome back to Derry Public Radio, a bi-weekly Stephen King book club podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Joshua Kahn, alongside CM Alexander.
Hello, everyone.
And Benjamin Graham.
Hey, Conster Readers.
And today we are continuing our series on It, selected by Patreon member Rachel Jansen, and we are covering chapters 14 through Derry, the Fourth Interlude, and CM is leading our discussion. CM, take it away.
Thanks, Josh. Quick recap on what we have covered so far. Our main characters have all returned to Derry as adults, and they've gone off on their own quests to have a lone encounter with Pennywise, which is a terrible idea. And then we ended with more childhood fun, specifically the crazy rock fight. We are back again in present day. Everyone's gathered at the library. They're all drinking. And
they've all brought hilariously character-appropriate booze.
And Stan is there, too.
Oh, yeah, Stan shows up. He makes a cameo.
It's upsetting. They're all having a great time, and Mike goes back to the library break room where he keeps his beer, which I love.
Yeah.
And opens the door, and balloons spill out.
An impossible amount of balloons, which also broke my brain to think about. And it's Stan's 11-year-old head. Not even Stan now, which also, I remember in the miniseries they do it, and it's the adult Stan's head. Mm-hmm. And just, I forgot that it was the 11-year-old head. That's so much darker.
And it's full of feathers. His mouth is full of feathers.
And it rolls across the room, which is the worst part.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it has Pennywise's eyes.
Yeah, the monstrous eyes. Oh, God.
And so it's got a message for them. And basically that message is, you guys are too old. You can't win. This is just, you should just quit now. This is horrible because this is a really terrible moment. And, you know, Stan is such a sad, complicated thing. I really liked all of Pennywise's puns.
Of course you did.
Into it. But the head vanishes and the balloons do not. They stick around. And they'd all just, I'd be popping them or putting them out the door.
I don't know what would be inside them. I would not touch them.
That's true. You don't want to pop those. So Mike is trying to remember what happened in the Barrens the day they started to really plan to do something about it. And this brings us to the construction of the clubhouse. Do one of you want to explain what the clubhouse is?
Mike goes down to join them, and this is when he is officially asked to formally made a member of the Losers Club. And they've decided that Ben has this great idea. He knows how to build an underground hideout for them, so that they know they told Bowers to stay away from the Barrens because it's theirs, but he's crazy. Mm-hmm. So this is a place that they can retreat to, they can be safe, and it's so insane because it shouldn't work.
It's so ambitious.
Yes.
Can you imagine, did you guys have some place you went to hang out like the Barrens when you were a kid?
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone did, right?
Mm-hmm. I hope so. That's great.
I really...
Probably less in the city. We're country folk compared to most metropolis cities.
Yeah, that's true. But I just can't imagine myself as an 11-year-old being like, yeah, let's build a tiny underground bunker.
I for sure have thought about it, but I know as soon as I didn't understand the concept of bracing, which is integral to an underground lair, that I would have... I think one time I tried to dig an underground hideout and I just made a hole.
Did you guys ever try to dig a grave just to see if you had it in you? Why'd you look at me that way?
Wow.
That's
The
terrifying.
sincerity that came out.
I'm joking. That
The listeners will
I
not see
never-
the look in your eyes.
Cold-blooded.
Wow.
Amazing.
I didn't have many friends.
And after that instance, you had one less conveniently.
Okay, so during the construction of all of this, this is where Mike gets to share kind of his story and everyone else. They really bring him into the fold. Everybody knows everything at this point. But Mike doesn't just have the bird story to share. He also tells them about a parade, which leads to this photo album that he eventually brings down to the Barrens to share with everyone.
And it's so cool because it's reminiscent of the photo album in Georgie's room, that this creature has been around. And I think Stan is the one who basically says it's like a comic book villain because he always keeps his trademark. And Stan's the one who posits that, well, now that you've told us you saw a giant bird, we can all see a giant bird. Thanks for fucking us, Mike.
Yeah, they're sharing their personal fears.
Yeah,
That's
now it
horrible.
can appear as
That's
any of those things.
Crazy. Because does that mean that they can see any form that it has ever taken, or just the ones they know about?
Just the ones they know about, I think.
And ones that would be in their head.
Because there's some evidence when we get to Patrick Hockstetter later that kind of backs that up.
Yeah.
Do we
Okay.
have to get to him?
I cannot wait to get to Patrick Hockstetter.
I did like, though, when Mike was talking about being in the parade and he kept seeing this clown and, seemed like adults didn't really notice him and kids seemed afraid of him. And then he was up further somewhere, which was impossible, and he's just super creepy.
Bill and Richie are excited that the album that Mike brings has plastic over the
Yeah.
pictures.
Yes.
Bill's like, oh, thank God, no one touched the fucking pictures.
That's very scary. That he's bringing down this thing that could potentially have the same effects as Georgie's photo album.
Which, surprise, it does.
The other thing about this chapter is called The Album. A lot of it is revolving around this thing, but it drops small things. Like it mentions that they're researching making silver bullets in one part-time. It mentions they pass within feet of a dead body at one point.
That part is it is such a shocking departure because up to this point it's just them hanging out
Yeah.
the Barrens, and it is very like they're talking about it and they're talking about serious stuff, but they're also just like being pals out in their place, and then it suddenly is like, who is it that comes down? It's like Bev and Eddie, or I don't remember who, are coming down to join them. And it just offhandedly mentions they pass feet by an undiscovered
It was
dead
Bill
body.
and Richie bringing stuff back from the dump.
That's right.
It's like this really disgusting juxtaposition or foreshadowing. I'm not sure which, because you're right, they are talking about this, but they're still just kids. And so it's like they're having this adult conversation, this real problem, while they're doing kid stuff. And then they don't even know that there's this body there. It's like childhood kind of in its prime and ended in.
It's crazy.
Yeah. What I like about it is that immediately following them, the near miss of them seeing that body, is when Bill has that notion of how many kids from Derry are gone this summer, whether they were sent away to like a summer camp or to spend summer with a relative, or they went on vacation with their parents. So there are a lot of children not in Derry, and there's also a lot of missing children in Derry. So sometimes because you don't see somebody, you don't know if it's because their parents took them away or sent them somewhere, or their food.
And it's kind of crazy too, because none of them were sent away. So just what a coincidence that they all happened to be in Derry that summer with each other. And that's not the only insight that they have. They also think about how, and I think it was Stan or Bill, thinks that Pennywise knows that they know, that he knows they know.
Yeah.
Something to that effect.
Yeah.
Which, in this, so when last time when we talked about why Stan died, I didn't remember that until you said it, Josh, that he got everything all at once, because it was Stan who mentioned this. He is so intuitive. He's the one who's kind of guessing and understanding more about the situation and what it possibly knows about them. So I'm fully on board now with the idea that, yeah, he could not deal with it.
Yeah, I think he's the least full of childlike wonder and faith. Like
Yes.
he's more mature and he's more analytical.
He's already an adult.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and they describe him that way a couple times.
So Bill also shares during this time his idea about how to kill a monster, which we are going to come back to a little later on. But for right now, Mike is going to help them with the Barons. He's going to show everybody his father's photo album.
The last photo, they start to hear it come to life, much like Bill and Richie did, and Ben reaches for the photo, and Bill and Richie are like, ugh! And it pushes out of the photo against the plastic, sticking his head out at them. It's fucking horrifying.
It's a horrible moment.
And then it cycles through all of everything they've seen it be, which just further proves Stan's point. And then this is the first time and not the last time that Stan nearly loses his mind, and Bill's got to get him under control.
He freaks out so hard that Bill is more concerned with how Stan is reacting than what this horrible thing that just happened with this photo album, which is telling.
Well, obviously, I think it was partly out of concern. But when Richie starts denying that this is happening, because he basically just shouts, no, this isn't real, and Bill has to get him under control, I took it as he not only is it just like stopping him from freaking out, but the denial is the important part. Like, it is extremely important that they acknowledge this is real. This is really happening. This can kill us.
Well, we've seen denial not work with other kids we've been with briefly who've been in disbelief and they've died. It's cool too because I really like this brief aside we get, like this insight into what Bill is thinking, and he's recognizing that they're all really looking to him. And he, in that moment, like he really wants to hate them for doing that because he's resenting the responsibility of this. But then he's like, well, I have to be fair and honest with myself and admit that I'm using them to get revenge on this creature for killing my brother. It's really, I just like that added layer of complexity for this kid.
Right.
It's so dark. This book is like the darkest book we've ever read.
It's so much responsibility to throw on a child. And you can't, I couldn't wrap my mind around that as an adult. I can't imagine trying to wrap my mind around it as like a 10-year-old.
Yeah. So now we're jumping back and forth from present day library, and each of our characters are going around and they are sharing sort of this remembering with everyone. So now it is Richie's turn, which Richie is the one who kind of tells us, like, none of them are telling this because everybody, they're not reminiscing about something they all remember, a shared memory. It's like they're living it for the first time, not reliving it as they're hearing it. It's like something is unlocking and it's opening this door of, oh yeah, this stuff happened to us. So it's really cool that they're not just reflecting on it. It's like almost like they're being thrown back in time, experiencing it.
Like they have to actively work to dig up these buried memories that they have. And it makes sense that they have to do this as a group because they can handle it all together.
Yeah.
Rather than, Stan.
Yeah.
Who
God,
did
poor
not.
Stan.
And we kind of see the magic of them being together too, like in real time. As this is going on, Richie's noticing they all look better. Like they look sort of revitalized, rejuvenated. Even Mike, who looked like he had just had such a rough life, looks better. Then a memory that has been trying to come back to Richie, and I didn't remember what this was, like the whole time this was happening. It's like, huh?
When he's rubbing his eyes
Yeah.
and stuff, yeah. I didn't remember what that was about either.
This hits him like a freight train. We finally find out why his eyes have been stinging so much ever since he got Mike's call. And so now we are going to learn about the smoke hole. This happened back in the Barrens mid-July, after the clubhouse was completed.
All because Ben one day aspired to live in Nebraska.
Well, the theory is later that book jumped out at him.
Yeah.
it picked him, or something made it pick him.
Yeah. Ben, while researching in the library, which is just something Ben does,
Classic Ben.
he discovers this old, it's described as an Indian ritual, right?
Mhm.
Right.
Where people would go into a hole with burning green wood, which produces a lot of smoke, and stay in there for as long as they can, and it would produce visions and tell you what to do. And so they're like, yeah, let's asphyxiate ourselves. We're children.
In this underground bunker I made.
So they are preparing, and first, I wanted to know what you guys thought about the disagreement they had.
My favorite part about this is actually it's Beverly standing up for herself and kind of putting the boys in their place.
Yeah, they are, at first they say, Bev, you can't do this.
Because it was Indian Braves, not Bravettes.
Yes, which
Well,
sucks.
Richie says it, but he says it jokingly.
Yeah.
And then Bill is like sincere, and she's like, okay, fuck this and all of you.
Which is an extra good point, seeing as, okay, the guys have a good idea. One person should not go down into the asphyxiation hole.
That makes
100%.
sense.
And it should probably be the one with asthma.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Anyway, they have this big fight about who is going to stay out of the hole. And Bev has the idea to draw matches. She takes 7 matches, burns the end of one, and then puts them in her fist, and they all draw, and they are all unburned.
Fucking great.
Amazing. I completely forgot about this
me
part.
too. I love it reflects sort of the thought they're having. Well, I think it's Richie who's having it as an adult, that they may not really be as in control of their lives, and any of this stuff that happened as they thought they were. Which
Is it this part where they think that someone says that there may be an opposite force, that there may be, if it is what they're up against, there may be something else?
yeah, because he's talking about the idea of this greater power pulling them all together and making this thing with it. Like, was the clubhouse even really their idea? How did that happen? And what I liked about it, he's like, that should be a comforting thought, but it really makes you feel out of control of your own life. Like it doesn't bring him comfort, and it shouldn't, because
Yeah, the
these
idea,
kids are
the
being
idea that
pulled-
you don't
yeah.
have free will should be upsetting.
Well, and they're being used. I mean,
Ben, what have we done with free will?
no, well, that's a good point.
all right, so now I said in my notes was like the House of Leaves clubhouse.
Oh,
Yes.
God, yes.
I forgot about this part too, when they go in there and they start burning it, and Richie, we're still with him, and he's noticing that, man, like Ben and Bill's elbows and legs were kind of poking me, and now they seem really far away from me. And this clubhouse eventually gets so big that he describes it as this huge ballroom-sized space. So everybody gets smoked out except for Richie and Mike.
That means something else.
Oh.
Yeah.
Everybody gets.
No, you
Okay.
You said it.
Okay.
It's said. I didn't expect it to be these two the first time I read it. And, well, the second time I read it either, because I forgot this happened. But it's so interesting that it happens to be this too.
The Mike and Richie go on this experience. Yeah, Mike makes sense to me because he's the historian.
Yep.
Yeah.
But the fact that Richie ends up having this experience where he starts floating, and suddenly he's floating above the barrens, but an impossibly lush barrens with where the creek is this roaring river. And as they're trying to process what the fuck is going on, they smell burning, and they look up, and there's a thing.
This is the neatest part.
This is my favorite part
Yeah.
of the book, because I love this idea, this Lovecraftian idea, that they see this thing falling from space, and the only way they can think to describe it is not a spaceship.
Yeah.
Yeah. What?
That's it.
Yeah.
That I love
That
the idea
leaves
that
it all to you.
it leaves it all to you. It becomes this idea that, like, it's so alien that you can't even process what it is. You can only process, well, it's not a bird.
It's not a spaceship.
It's not a spaceship. I don't know what the fuck
What does
this.
that leave?
And weirdly, it made me think of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah.
Yeah. On The Heart of Gold, Arthur keeps trying to make the drink machine make tea. But no matter what he asks for, it's described as making something that is, quote, almost but not entirely completely unlike tea. And that's what...
God, Hitchhiker's Guide is such a great
It's so
series.
good. But yeah, I love that they see this thing falling from the sky and they know that's it.
They see it coming thousands of years ago before Derry
They say millions.
existed.
It is
Well, way to one up me.
it's inconceivable.
Like 100 years ago.
There's actually a theory that I found online because they both don't agree in their perception that just it's not a spaceship. I'm trying. There's a reference to one of them thinking it's spaceship like, but not a spaceship.
Like it's something protecting what's inside, but
somebody on, I wish I would have grabbed their screen name so I could have given them credit, but it was a theory that they didn't see the same thing. That one of them saw the impact of it in Derry. The other person actually saw the Tommyknockers ship crash land. And right, it was a string to tie. It was an effort to tie Tommyknockers to this incident and to tie the aliens from Dreamcatcher to Tommyknockers. It was a very interesting theory. It wasn't
That's a
good.
stretch.
It wasn't a solid theory, which is why I don't remember it. But I remember reading it and being like, "Oh, that's funny."
I don't mind that. So the others pull Mike and Richie out because they hear them screaming. So as this thing is crashing to Earth, they get pulled out. Although it's funny because when they open the door, they don't see them at first. It's like they can't find them, even though the clubhouse is, what'd they say, like 5 feet by 5 feet?
Not big.
It's very small for 7 people, I feel
Yeah,
like.
when they all sit in a circle, they're touching each other.
Oh, sorry. I was going to propose through my notes. I just saw this to ask you guys about a Derry Public Radio smoke ritual.
One.
Well,
But,
we can do one, but it's going to be a different kind.
so anyway, as Mike is explaining to the others exactly what they think they each saw, kind of, and how they could tell that it was it, and it was bad and it meant bad for whomever it encountered or whatever it encountered. I kept thinking about our discussion about what's it and what's Derry. How bad is Derry on its own? And I guess this confirms it's all it. But its impact has sort of permanently stained the soil of Derry so that even if it's hibernating, there's still going to be repercussions or just whatever, I guess, would continue its food cycle is going to be constantly at work to do that.
It made me think of Judd and the Pet Cemetery.
Yeah.
What is it? The ground is stonier. Yeah, the whole thing that like there's just this piece of land that is bad. We don't know why it's bad. So if you if you knew about Derry but you didn't know about it, you kind of have that same like this giant stretch of a town. This land is bad. Well, I guess Mike's dad pretty much says as much.
Yeah. Now we're going to jump back to something Eddie remembers, and he remembers it because his arm starts to hurt, and he thinks it's funny as he's realizing why it hurts because he's been to the doctor as an adult, and the doctor's commented on this break, and he's like, oh, yeah, I don't know how it happened. Must have fallen out of a tree or something. But he's the kind of guy who goes to the doctor like every 6 weeks for a normal checkup, and he's reflecting, it's kind of weird to me to not be concerned that I don't remember how my arm got broken. And now we get to find out, which it's not as like cool and exciting as alien stuff, but it is really disturbing and scary just because it's like Eddie. Like, of course, he's the one to be on his own and have this encounter.
Well, what makes this great is that it's normal. No supernatural things were necessary for what happens to Eddie. And that's, again, one of the things that this book does masterfully is that it gives you so many incidents that if you take the supernatural out of the story, you still have a pretty dangerous story with these kids and Henry Bowers.
Mm-hmm.
and his gang.
Well, but first, before we even get to what Henry does, Mr. Keene does something.
Oh, boy.
Eddie is at the pharmacy and he is picking up the usual, his drugs, his mom's drugs, and a candy bar or something sweet. And Mr. Keene decides, all right, it's time to have a talk with Eddie. But I do love that Eddie immediately thinks he's in trouble because there's a no shoplifting sign. And it's like that truly anxious person will have that thought when they see something like that. But what if I accidentally stole something and I get in trouble? Like, what? So that was kind of fun. Yeah, Mr. Keene is going to confront Eddie with the truth. Okay, you guys might change my mind. I feel like it's written to make Mr. Keene seem like the super bad guy in this, and he did it for a bad reason. I don't think that's true. I think he doesn't know how to talk to kids, and but remember, this is the 50s. Like you aren't going to, he's probably just wanting Eddie to toughen up and be a man. Like that's kind of the mindset of older men in that decade, I feel like. So I feel like that explains his behavior. It's still shitty, but I think his intentions were more pure than Eddie thinks
his
they were.
intentions were tough love.
I'm not sure on the particulars of medical ethics, but it seems like this whole placebo thing, I don't know that doctors would do that now.
Well, we should
Unless they are
explain.
specifically taking place in a medical trial.
Right. We should explain for the listeners what we're talking about.
Mr. Keene says that Eddie has asthma, but he has asthma in his head. He doesn't actually have asthma. The spray that he has is water and some chemical that just gives it a medicine taste.
Camphor.
Yeah, and he points out that there's no warnings on the instructions because you can't overdose on this because it's not medicine.
And he's talking about sort of the history of why that even exists. Kind of the medical trials thing. And I don't know, Ben. I feel like at least then maybe that did happen. But Eddie freaks out because of course the message that he's getting is that Mr. Keene's saying he's crazy because he refers to it as a mental weakness, which is irritating. But he freaks out and he runs. And so he's so flustered by this encounter that when later he's like leaving the general store or something, he comes out and like, bam, there's Henry, Patrick,
Victor, Chris, and Patrick.
And instead of when they're like, hey, are your stupid baby friends inside? He's like, no. I'm like, oh, Eddie, no. So they start to push him around, really aggressive, really quickly, too. They shove gravel in his mouth.
Well, I mean, Bowers' nose is broken, and he's got bruises, and so the fact that he goes 0 to 60, he already does that, but this is not surprising that he throws him on the ground and just starts rubbing gravel in his face.
I guess it surprised me because it's very much a public place.
Yeah.
And an adult does try to intervene, and I think under different circumstances, or maybe a couple weeks ago, that might have worked, because the adult, grabs Henry, and everyone else is like, oh shit, and Henry shoves him and basically threatens him, and the guy's like, fine, but I'm going to call the cops. Thankfully, he does.
Scary 12-year-old. Let's also not lose track, he is 12 years old.
God, that's so hard to remember.
Yeah, that's crazy. My immediate reaction was, no, he's not.
Yeah, because you imagine him as like the what was
Kiefer Sutherland and Stand By Me.
Yes, or I was thinking Billy and Carrie.
Yeah,
like the older greaser.
Henry's like a 28-year-old playing a.
What's a greaser that can't drive a car?
I don't know.
Man, Ben, you come up with the best riddles.
There's no answer.
You're the Confucius of this podcast.
I thought, man.
Did you get that in a fortune cookie?
Jesus Christ. Eddie takes this opportunity while Henry is distracted by threatening an adult to take off. And he makes a real good run of it, guys.
Poor kid. He gives it his best. Fucking tricycles, man.
Yeah, the dad of the kid who in the future gets brutalized in the bathroom toilet is riding his tricycle.
Stephen King, you son of a bitch. Because this is not the first, second, or last time this happens in this book, where you just meet a kid and he's like, later, him or someone he loves will be brutally murdered.
Yep, and we've already heard about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he unfortunately comes right out into Eddie's path. Eddie just doesn't have time to react, trips over him, and Henry and gang catch up. And they break his arm. And they probably would have killed him, but...
Which is fucking brutal. To just break someone's arm with your bare hands.
I love, though, that Eddie, his response, and I love this, is horrible, I love it, but his response is kind of like how they treat it. He starts laughing. Like, the situation is just so outrageous. He's laughing, and he kind of notices Henry seems taken aback by that, possibly even scared. And he's got like a really positive attitude about what's going on somehow.
But I get it. Like, have you ever, when you were a kid or anytime, taken a fall or something where you're like, oh, I for sure broke my ankle?
You just have to, yeah.
And like Eddie's sensation is like, we have that sensation because we feel that intense pain and we are familiar with that pain. So you're like, oh, this is bad. Eddie has been so protected that his idea of what pain is and now feeling what actual pain is almost a relief for him. And I kind of get that.
Yeah. Sometimes you just got to embrace it or you freak out hard.
It's a great way to show how strong Eddie is. That he does not need to be coddled the way he's being. He is a tough kid, even though he hasn't been raised that way.
I love, too, that he gets out a good, like, zinger on Henry before the cops come. Because he tells him, you're crazy and your dad's even crazier. And Henry completely loses his shit about that.
And then Patrick hawks a loogie on his face.
God, there's been a lot of foreshadowing about Patrick being, in outright statements, being crazier than Henry.
Yeah.
And we find out that he definitely is. Before that, though, we're going to spend a little more time with Eddie. He wakes up in the hospital and two really important things happen in the scene. We can talk about both of them, but he has an amazing confrontation with his mom. And he somehow is like witness to something that he can't possibly know about as it's happening, which is cool.
It's because Sonia makes every effort to make what happened to Eddie his friend's fault. She wants to put the blame. This never would have happened if you didn't hang out with those friends of yours. If you just never come out of my womb, you'd be fine. Is not exactly what she says, but it's more or less.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. And it's when Eddie stands up for his friends, because Eddie doesn't stand up for himself necessarily. He stands up for his friends. He's more ready to do that. And the fact when Sonia, I believe it says something to the effect of she sees more to Eddie than she's ever seen before, and that scares her.
She sees something in his friends too, that she's still a mom and she has that mother's instinct that they are going to cause something bad is going to happen to Eddie because of them, and she's not entirely wrong.
No.
And I also really liked, no, I didn't like that. I mean, this is cool. Okay, sorry. Everyone listening to the audiobook, you know that this part that we're covering for this entire episode is the guy, and very effectively and appropriately, but it's tough to get through, just kind of screaming the whole audiobook.
Yeah.
His voice for Sonia is amazing.
So abrasive. And it's supposed to be, I get it, but it's really rough.
I loved it.
You are very much in that moment with Eddie. But I love that he grew some balls. And
he traps her.
He does.
And that's what's cool. Again, another point. Eddie is stronger than you give him credit for because he calls her out. He points out that there's no warnings on his medicine, tells his mom it's fake. And he essentially says, you know what, Mom, I'm going to wait for my friends to come visit. I'm sure you'll let them come visit and I'll keep taking my asthma medicine. And he traps her in that she has to make one concession for the other.
Yeah.
Which also makes sense retroactively. I think I said in an earlier episode that I didn't get why Eddie never let go of it. And now it makes sense. It's it is a totem for him. Once it became not something he quote unquote needed, it still helped him.
It was a tool in a different way.
Yeah.
Because even he was questioning, like, why am I like this as an adult? Eddie has balls on top and bottom. That was too easy, you guys. Don't give that to me.
Hey, they don't all have to be hard. Wait, what?
What?
So Eddie's friends do come back to visit.
Eddie's playing hardballs over here.
Oh, God. And
Okay, now we're just saying words.
Yeah, we're just-
they update him on their plan to make silver bullets, which kind of gets tweaked by the time they actually execute that plan. But we find out that Beverly is the best shot, and she is really unhappy about that. Understandably, because she's terrified. You know, that's a lot of responsibility for her. Like, oh, what if I miss and you all die? So that's Eddie's story. And now we are back in the library, and it's Beverly's turn. And I'm very upset that she gets all of the awful, weird sexual stuff
Yeah.
every fucking time.
This makes sense to belong to her in that it's really funny to watch her piece together. What the fuck
That is
that?
funny, yeah.
Because this is the first time she ever sees a penis, and she's like, what is happening here?
This long tubes.
What is-
Okay, I had made the comment that the scene with the witch / Bev's dad was the worst thing I'd ever read, and nothing was ever going to replace that. And I
This
honestly
book is
meant
just
it.
constantly
Yeah,
one-upping that.
I really meant it, and I got to this, and I was like, I was wrong.
This is I mentioned the popping out of existence was one of those Stephen King moments that lives in my head forever. But the true, if I were to rank them, number one is the Wilma Nettie fight from Needful Things. Number two is Patrick Hochsteiger's fridge.
The way that this book so carefully and brutally details things that I think most authors and most books do kind of gloss over. Like they let you know what's happening, but this takes it to the extreme edge and makes you so uncomfortable and horrified. All right, so let's talk about what it actually is, because I can't delay it any longer.
Are we talking about the lighting the farts?
That's
You're
the first
being-
part.
Yeah, we'll
That
start with
part's-
lighting farts.
Yeah,
Okay.
let's ease into
Let's
this.
start with the wholesome part.
Yeah, so
As wholesome as this chapter gets.
Beverly finally sees her first penises. It's unfortunate that they are attached to Henry and his friends. But she's going down to the junkyard to practice shooting, and she's by herself, even though none of them should ever be by themselves.
Right.
And she thinks at first that she hears and sees her friends down there. And she's just walking like nothing, like out in the open. And she realizes when she is a little too close for comfort that it is Patrick, Vic, Chris, and Henry. There's four of them,
Belch.
right? Oh, Belch.
Victor and Chris are the same person.
Oh, yeah. I think I made that mistake before. And we'll just move past it. And they are... do guys do this?
I have done this.
No.
Okay. So, funny story. Didn't take our pants off.
Okay.
So
that's the part that I was like,
Yeah.
no, I've never gotten naked in the junkyard and lit my farts off with my friends.
we tried it, and a friend, we didn't take our pants off, so he caught his pants on fire, and it was hilarious.
Boys are dumb.
Boys are idiots.
I had a friend that used to light his pubes on fire because he thought it was funny.
What?
Yeah, he was weird. Hey, Brian.
Oh, my God. Okay.
Oh boy.
This book is why people don't read Stephen King. They don't like horror. All right, so they are lighting their farts on fire, and then it's just down to Henry and Patrick. Wait, I'm not going to describe this. I'm running the episode. One of you.
Patrick jerks them both off, and it's real uncomfortable. And eventually, Henry's like, hey, fuck off, and gets real homophobic.
Well, Patrick offers to put it in his mouth.
Yeah.
That is the catalyst. They're having a great time.
They're-
Just two guys hanging out.
dual wielding.
he was
Christ.
He's being very gentle with Henry's part of it.
Right.
Yeah.
He
Just
was,
two friends.
He was enthusiastic, I'd say.
What's a handy between two bros?
Right.
But he freaks out and starts walking towards Bev. And she's
hiding in the back of a car now. Yeah.
And as they get closer, Patrick's going after him like, not a big deal. It's
You
whatever.
got a boner. It's the biggest boner I ever saw.
All right, hit the sting for boner talk. But as Henry is using slurs to be homophobic about Patrick. The straw that breaks the camel's back here is that Patrick is, he's like, don't tell anybody. And Patrick's like, I'll do whatever the fuck I want. I don't care about anything. And Henry goes, if you tell anybody, I'll tell them about your fridge. And that's when Patrick realizes he had a suspicion someone knew. It could just be because he's a paranoid sociopath. But he had a suspicion that people knew. And so now that he knows for a fact someone knows about his fridge, that kind of shuts him up. And he has to do something about that.
Yeah, because Patrick, the part that's fascinating to me about what we're going to get into is that he's crazy. But he knows, even though he can't really empathize or feel emotion, like including fear, he understands that there are rules in society that you have to follow. He does have some sort of sense of self-preservation. So he knows that people would not react well and that he has to keep it a secret. I feel like if what happens to him hadn't happened, I think he would have murdered Henry.
Oh, he 1000% is set up as a serial killer.
Yeah.
And that's why this chapter is so effective and so scary, is because, just like you said, in other circumstances, Patrick would be the villain of his own book.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Please don't include him in our next Christmas episode.
I promise to not put him in Marry, Fuck, Kill ever.
Thank you. And we're kind of glossing past how all of this affects Beverly. It's a very well-written, tense scene for her because it's interesting, like the female perspective of it. She's seeing this kind of sexual thing. It's like her first real exposure to sexuality. It's unfortunate that it's not a positive one. And she's reacting to it sort of like disgusted and intrigued, disgusted because of who it is. But then, of course, as she's watching Patrick give the balls attention as well, she's thinking, I don't like,
Okay.
Whatever. She's thinking that Bill has those.
Yes.
So she's feeling more emotions than just disgust. And she's also terrified for her life because she also has a thought, if they find me, what will they do to me? What if Henry wants to put that somewhere in me? Like, she doesn't quite understand it, but
it is a truly horrifying
it's an instinctual...
Because she's also hiding in the backseat of a junked car, so it's not like she's well hidden. If you walked by and looked down, she'd be in plain sight. Yeah.
And then she, they part ways. She escapes, but not really. We are going to spend some time with Patrick, and it's horrible. For anybody who hasn't been following along or hasn't made it to this part yet, this is extremely disturbing. And I'm just going to put it out there quickly and concisely. If you guys want to say anything about it, you can, and then we'll get to the fridge.
Well, I feel like I've definitely talked about this segment before on the podcast, right? Because this is such a huge Stephen King moment. We've 100% talked about it.
Yeah.
So we don't have to now.
Yeah. Mostly the fact that with such cool casual disregard, it describes this guy murdering his baby brother.
Yep.
As
His
a kindergartner.
As a kindergartner, murdering his infant brother. It is shockingly dark, shockingly awful.
The death of Freddie in Mr. Mercedes, when Brady killed his brother, that was rough. What makes this 10 times worse is that Patrick smothers him, lets him go, just like, oh, that's neat. That's how that happened. And
so
then
he does
it 3 times. And the third time is when he finally does it. And like you said, Ben, it is so casual because we find out that Patrick believes he is the only real thing in existence. And what has always horrified him about his brother is that if my mom and dad made me and I'm real, that means he might be real too. Also,
terrifying.
Having this baby ruined my routine. My dinner comes later than it used to. I don't get as much attention as I used to. So if I'm going to keep this is the only option.
But it's not even with any emotion still.
No.
Like that, because the Brady thing was horrible, but there was still, as awful as it was, and as horrible as he and his mom are, there was still regret and despair and like grief about the situation. He describes killing his infant brother the way you describe like accidentally stepping on ants on the sidewalk. Just like, oh, no big deal.
He did it, and then he went and watched cartoons because that was done.
Having committed that act, that's when, it's described as if his whole world was like black and white. This was the first time he saw color.
I feel like I can summarize with this one note that I made. Patrick's mom is losing her mind. Patrick puts on a sweater.
Yeah.
It is that disconnected. He is that far removed.
And his dad sees the wet footprints, or like he was standing in a puddle of water because it had been raining or snowing or something. And he sees some of that there later, and he just can't even allow himself to follow that thought anywhere. So he doesn't. So this is what leads Patrick to his own special way of feeling things and seeing colors again.
This book's version of animal violence. When was the last time we read a book that didn't feature animal violence? It is one of the most pervasive tropes in King. I had never realized. I had never realized how pervasive it is, but I swear there is not a single book that goes by where something terrible doesn't happen to an animal.
Mr. Mercedes, we're led to believe where that's going to go with Odell, and we thankfully get a different direction there.
My husband stopped reading he couldn't make it past this. He's like, oh yeah, the dog. No, I was done.
If somebody told me I tried to read it, I got to this chapter and I'm done, I'd say, yeah.
I get it. Yeah.
I'd say you're allowed.
I would say, yeah, there's some stuff later on that you're not going to like either.
Like, it doesn't get nicer.
Basically, Patrick has been finding strays and wounded animals, and there's a fridge kind of not in the main junkyard part, but on a path, which happens to be right by where Beverly is relieving herself because she's been hiding terrified in the back of this car while this stuff is going on. And Patrick has a death refrigerator where he is trapped animals, and he's become obsessed with it. He draws about it, and that's what Henry was threatening him with.
It's so gross.
What happens to him, what Beverly witnesses, isn't enough.
This is what fascinates me most about Patrick Hochstetter, is just the implications it has on how it works.
Yeah.
Is very cool. Because Beverly witnesses him coming up on his fridge and opening it, and he expects there to be, a dog in there?
A pigeon.
A pigeon,
yeah. That's right. But what he finds is these shapeless blobs, like fleshy leeches with wings.
Mosquito leeches.
Yes.
It's horrible.
In my head, I can picture them so clearly, and they're disgusting.
Well, and leeches are his childhood fear. He got a leech on him once, and that was like the only time in his life he ever felt like fear or showed any type of real emotion to anybody.
Right. And these things, what this has always meant to me is that because Patrick does not feel normal feelings like fear, it doesn't have anything to latch on to. It goes, this kid kind of doesn't like leeches. I guess I'll kind of go that direction. But they're still just like formless nothings.
Yeah.
And they fly at him and puncture his eyeball and start drinking his juices.
The one in his mouth. Because it jabs into his tongue, drinks, and then it bursts in his own mouth.
And it's like a mosquito if the hole it left was like the size of a dime.
Yeah. And they constantly drink until they burst, and he tries to get away, and then he sees a man approach, but the face is like all runny, and it cannot lock in a form because Patrick's the only thing that's real. So there's nothing, and he just says hello and goodbye.
Well, in the voice of Bev's dad, which...
Well, he doesn't hear it in the voice of Bev's dad.
No, but Bev does.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is horrible.
Because that's how he couldn't lock in a shape that she could see, so that's the closest.
And supporting, that they see things that that have been shared. Now this bleach mosquito is real for her as well,
Yeah.
and one does attack her.
And he scoops Patrick up and drags him to the sewers. And Bev can see the trail that it leads. Fucked up, man.
So Beverly takes her friends to the fridge to kind of show them what's going on. And I'm just mentioning this because I thought it was really cool. There's a note waiting for them. And this is where Bill gets really, really upset. But, it's trying to scare them. But what it actually does, with this note is makes them a stronger unit together. Because this is where they all kind of pull through for him. And they're like, yeah, this was your brother, but we're all in this. And we've got your back and we're going to do this. What does the note say?
So when they open it up, the fridge now is full of orange pom-poms, and it has this written inside. It says, "Stop now before I kill you all. A word to the wise from your friend Pennywise." It's fucking creepy. And that's Bill's like, that this message means that we scare it.
Yeah. And that's really important. That's something they continue to hold on to. They craft their plan about these silver dollars, melting them down and making them into slugs that Beverly is going to shoot with a slingshot. It's cute, their plan. Like, I would have never been smart enough as a kid to think of this.
Absolutely not.
They're at Bill's house, and they've set up this fake Monopoly game that looks like it's been being played for hours. So when his parents eventually come home, they don't know what they've been up to. So and there's a little bit of foreshadowing about how, there's a girl in the group, but she doesn't have to worry about that. They're too young.
Yes.
It's gross reading it and knowing what's coming.
No, when you're like, they're playing Monopoly and there's foreshadowing, the first thing that jumped in my head was about how Stan had so much money. And I was like,
Jesus
CM!
Christ!
Jesus! Because they make a big deal about that joke. Like, that's when they come home and they make that joke, and the parents are like, kids! And they're all laughing. They're like,
kids?
all right, I guess.
It's okay for us to be anti-Semitic. We're 11.
What? What?
We're going to now get the confrontation at the house on Neibolt Street through Ben's perspective. And we've seen Ben's chest before because he showed Ricky Lee when he first gets called back to Derry, the H from Henry. But now, all of a sudden, kind of like Bill's scar on his palm that Audra sees appear, he has these huge slash marks.
How is Ben not dead?
Oh,
I swear, by the end of this section, I don't know how Ben did not die.
yeah. So they've got all this research on making slugs. Beverly's going to shoot them. And they make their way to the house on Neibolt Street.
I think this is another... They don't come right out and say it, but I feel like this is another tip in the hand of destiny, or some hand moving them, because they explain the process of melting these silver dollars down and making these 2 ball bearings. That's all they have, 2 ball bearings. And the pores and the melting, all of it is pinpoint accuracy. If they like, I could not imagine being that careful, especially with how many hands are involved in it, that they made them perfectly. And it's a subtle detail, but I feel like that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I liked the whole process of them coming up with this plan and executing it. And the house on Neibolt Street is so freaking cool because of the way it changes while they're inside of it. So they go in same way that Richie and Bill had done. Poor Ben gets stuck.
Oh, yeah.
And Beverly's...
Like Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah, and he's just... All he can think about is... how his stomach, his bare stomach is right in his beloved's face because Beverly went down before him. And I get it when you're a kid and you like somebody. Everything you do is disgusting and horrible.
Right, yeah.
But they are making their way through, and the whole time it's trying to scare them into firing off the slugs so they exhaust their ammunition before they even get to it. But together they remain strong. But there's a moment with Stan, and Bill has to pull them together again.
There are 2 things that I feel like it's interesting to point out, because we talked about how all of the losers have their strengths that just seem to come naturally. And I didn't notice this the first time I read it, but I noticed it this time, that Ben is the person who notices that the architecture is wrong, that the angles are impossible in this house. And that knowledge just comes to him, and that's when they can all recognize something's weird.
And that knowledge, having that almost makes him get lost from the others because suddenly
Yeah.
they're down this really far corridor and way ahead of him.
And Big Bill goes Super Mario, and he leaps up like he's punching a block, and he punches, because the ceiling looks like it's 10 feet tall. He leaps up, and his fist stops at something in midair, and pieces of the ceiling come down, and it brings everything back.
Which is weird because I guess I would have expected that in that moment it really was that tall.
That is something that bothered me because in the whole book, it's literally an important part of its thing that it doesn't make illusions. The things that it does are real. Like, that's a really important part of its lore. But yeah, then this one thing is just an illusion.
Because the other stuff that happens aren't even illusions, it's just trickery. Which, okay, because that brings me to the sound they all start hearing, which Mike figures out before everybody like freaks out and runs out of the house that it's a moose call and starts describing like the string. I'm like, okay, so I'm imagining Pennywise like carefully setting up this thing to scare them.
Well, I guess everything with Pennywise isn't an illusion, but I mean, were the fortune cookies illusions? Because they're the only ones who saw them that way. I feel like there's a certain amount of illusion that you could lend to Pennywise, but just anytime it's physically him, despite him not casting a shadow, that is not illusion.
Or was it not an illusion because Bill believed the ceiling was there and that made it not an actual
That could
thing,
be.
but made it real?
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to go with.
Yeah.
I like that better.
It works. I do want to point out, though, that, again, Stan loses his mind, and the conversation, basically, Bill grabs him, and Stan's losing his mind, and he's like, look, I'm in this because I have a dead brother. You have birds. These are the same.
And
Stan's like, yeah. That's a pep talk only children can
I
give
was
to
going to
other
say,
children.
and yet it rings completely true. It is the most childlike, just get it together for birds.
So they all end up in the bathroom after just some awesome scary shit in the house. And it comes up through the drain. And I believe this happens because Richie is like, you guys, it's the werewolf.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, that is what they're facing. That's what they're dealing with.
Also, the fact that Ben can see it coming before, like he sees the toilet and it's all busted, and he just in his mind's eye, he sees something moving through the pipes,
Like shifting as it's coming,
fucking-
about to take form.
So cool.
And this is too where they realize, I think is it Bill that realizes it's in the sewers. Like that's where it always comes from. It always comes from the drains.
They've had the suspicion's been there for a while, but this is that definitive moment. Now we know, because we knew it was here, and now we know where to follow it.
The description of this werewolf and the fight they have is super scary. It's huge. It has these horrible claws. It swipes at Ben. I think he's jumping in front of Beverly about this time.
He pushes her out of the way.
Blocking her shot. And he gets a stomach full of claws, and he falls in the bathtub.
Yeah, I'm surprised you weren't as excited about this part, because Ben used your self-defense tactic. He thumbs it in the eye, and that's when the werewolf throws him in the tub, and that's Bev takes her shot, and it goes through and it punctures a hole through its snout, and it just blood gushing out of this massive hole in its nose.
I love that it only works because it's a werewolf.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
It's perfect.
Well, and they have the silver slugs, so thank God Richie thought it was going to be a werewolf.
But then the most perfect thing, because now she's all out of ammo, but they start shouting at her to fire again and finish it off, and it does not call their bluff. It retreats.
Yeah.
It believes that she might have more, and so it takes off.
They use its own trick against it.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you have faith in something, which is really, really cool.
And just that afterwards, they're like, yeah, next time we see it, it's probably going to be in a shape that silver doesn't hurt it. That'd be smart.
And then they all realize Beverly has boobs.
It's very important to the story that we take this time out.
Anyway,
Well, this is also Ben. When we kind of really first we've talked around it, but I think this is the first time that Ben starts trying to piece together where does power come from in the first place. All of this is happening so far. They've just been reacting,
yeah.
but Ben is starting to dig into like what is the core of this. If we're just doing stopgaps, what's gonna end this?
Because he sees Bill notice Beverly in a way that so far only Ben has really noticed her. And he realizes like, oh, never going to happen between me and Beverly. And it's so sad too, because at one point he's like, I don't care. I love her and she can have Bill or whatever she wants in the world as long as I can just have my love for her, even if she never knows. It's like, fuck, man.
Shit, we've all been there. Like, unrequited love's a real rite of passage. You know? So I feel like in some way, shape, or form, we've all had that moment of wanting to hold on to the fantasy. Somebody you didn't say something to because you didn't want to ever wreck the fantasy that maybe this exists.
God. Or they wreck the fantasy by opening their mouths and realize they're real stupid. And then you move your locker so that you don't have to run into them anymore. It happened to a friend.
Yeah,
It's a
sounds like
terrible way to talk about your husband.
Oh, no. Okay, we're going to end with, I think, so far, probably my favorite flashback of Derry history.
Agreed.
This is so cool. We're in the fourth interlude. We pop back to kind of present day. It's before Mike makes the calls. We're back with his journals again. He's super drunk. And the audiobook part, there were some parts that were slurred that I'm like, not sure that part should have been slurred. We're losing. I think he really got drunk, and I respect that.
Steven Weber is a professional.
Yep.
And I respect every
He's
choice
so
he
method.
makes.
So he's talking about, or thinking, writing, about how the town would really react if he didn't just preserve the nice history and highlight that of Derry, if he let people know the truth, what he knows. And so we are going back in time to the silver dollar, which was referenced, as a tragedy very, very early on, with the union workers who were horribly murdered. I think that was the people that we said were found like dismembered in the forest or something. This part is very dark and fascinating. It's the affair of Claude Hero and the silver dollar.
Claude was among the lumberjacks who wanted to unionize.
There's like 4 of them,
Yeah.
not even a large number.
And he avoided being murdered by the opposite side of that argument.
Not just like, not even just executed, but violently, viciously killed.
Yeah. And sending a clear message, they had something that said union taped to all of them or pinned to all of them. And just kind of turned, they never found Claude after that. But suddenly there were tracts of forest being burned. And people would catch glimpses of him here and there, but nobody could really pin him down. This also was referenced in Tommyknockers because they talk about the fires that took down whole tracts of lands in Haven.
That's
also,
cool.
And that's where he was responsible for all these. And it all comes to a head because by September they were like, well, it's probably done. Like fires aren't going to catch so easy in the winter in Maine. So I think we have all winter to find him. It's going to be easy. So September 9th, they are at the Sleepy Dollar, or they're at the Sleepy Silver Dollar is the full name of this place. And it's full of loggers getting drunk, and Hero shows up, and he's just chatting with people, casually hanging out. He's got this big axe just hanging out next to him, and nobody really thinks twice about it.
Okay, can we go to the splatter meter? Just with the laundry list of
Our classic bit, the splatter meter?
yeah,
Everyone's favorite Derry Public Radio bit?
That
every
old chestnut hit the sting.
I'm trying to start a thing.
No, I love it.
Yeah, always start a thing by jumping in the middle as though it's an
you have
established
to pretend that
I'm into
it's
it.
canon. Okay, we have a hand chopped off at the wrist, an axe in the head, an axe in the back, an axe in the gut, a dismembering, a severed head. But what's cool about this is the whole time this is happening, everyone else in the bar who's not being murdered acts like nothing is going on.
Yeah. The interview that is then relayed to Mike essentially is, we were aware something was happening, but we weren't conscious of it. Like it
didn't seem
was
like
abstract.
an important thing to think about.
Even though one of the heads rolls over to somebody and he kicks it away.
Oh my God. Well, so then a mob forms shortly after that. He takes off and word spreads and people start getting upset about it. And this is what Mike describes as the interviewee describes as the last lynching in Derry.
What I found so interesting about this is that it's the people who stormed the jail, broke Claude Hero out, and then lynched him. Several of them were people who were there, and it's because that this is something that they need to sort out attitude has now worn off, and this other they mention a clown, that there was a clown was around that seemed to be riling people up, and they all just got sucked into it. It's just interesting how that turn happens. These people who were completely apathetic to what was happening, now so angry they're moved to breaking into a police station and murdering someone.
And that reminds me too that we adults do see it. Because the Bradley gang situation, multiple people reported that. So before we end this episode, because that's the end of our reading for this, I wanted to ask what you guys thought about Mike's idea that the kids who have been murdered, he's talking present day, were partially eaten. And he thinks that that's because, they weren't like sexually molested or anything. Because as a kid, your fear is of monsters. And what are monsters going to do to you? They're going to eat you. And that's why it is eating them. If they had a different fear, that's what it would be doing to the bodies.
That's extremely scary.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I have been having trouble discussing this book because so much of it I just want to boil down to, this is really good. This is really scary.
It's something like it's just a thought that Mike has that I think as you're reading it, you have it, it's there, but something about him describing that, I don't know, it's a beautiful piece of writing.
Well, and this is also at the end of all this, when he's talking about that, that's when Ben asks the question in this flashback of what is power, where does power come from, and Mike is the person who he's answering it in this journal where he says that the source of power is faith, and no one is more capable of pure faith than children.
Yeah,
which makes them a target and just the most easily accessible and, dare I say, fun target for a creature like Pennywise.
So if there are any kids listening, sorry, and
you should not be.
Put this down, and just believe that monsters are out to tickle you. No, that's gross.
All right.
That's worse.
That's it for this episode of Derry Public Radio. As always, thank you for listening. Join us for our next episode where we're going to be finishing the book, guys.
Woo!
We're doing it. For Benjamin Graham and Sam Alexander, this is Joshua Kahn reminding you, words don't matter if a thing works.
Hey everyone, CM Alexander here. Thank you for listening to It Part 4. We hope you enjoyed it. I have a small bit for you that didn't make the episode, but before we get to that, I want to remind you that you can still use our 20% off code DERRY at manscaped.com. They have a new product coming out this new year, their Ultra Premium Body Wash, and we're going to get to try it. We'll report back to you on what we think, but in the meantime, they have a bunch of cool grooming tools that you can dig into on their website. Perhaps if Patrick had given Henry the Lawnmower 4.0 instead of a handy, they would have been better friends. You don't have to stretch your wallet like I just stretched that analogy when you use our code DERRY for 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com. And speaking of trimming things, here's that bit that didn't make the show. You fucker. You made that have to be in the episode. I know what you're doing.
It was perfect. It was great.
That's all for now, listeners. Goodbye.